I'm Days, and I'm 28 years old. 24 hours ago, I buried my husband of 5 years. My family chose to celebrate my sister's engagement instead. Right now, I'm staring at my mother's contact name on my phone screen, watching it ring for the third time in 10 minutes. The cemetery dirt is still under my fingernails from throwing that first handful of earth onto Michael's mahogany casket, and she's calling me like I'm her personal banker. I answered on the fourth ring, mainly because the silence in this enormous house was becoming unbearable. Our house. My house now, I suppose, though nothing about it feels like mine without Michael's terrible morning singing echoing from the shower. Days, honey. Mom's voice carried that particular tone she used when she wanted something expensive. I know this is difficult timing, but we need to discuss Michael's trust fund. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely betrayed by the people who should love you most. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. I didn't respond immediately. Through our floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the November rain pelting against the glass, matching the storm building in my chest. Michael had always said my family had perfect timing for the worst possible moments. He'd been more right than he knew. The trust fund, I repeated slowly, like I was testing how the words tasted. Bitter, as it turned out. Well, yes. Now that he's gone, we'll need access to those funds for Sarah's wedding. The venue deposit alone is $40,000, and with the guest list we've planned, she trailed off, apparently expecting me to fill in the financial blanks like I had for the past 2 years. I walked to Michael's study, where his reading glasses still sat folded on his desk, next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. He'd been working on 17 across, betrayed by those closest. The answer was probably something like, stabbed in the back, but Michael never got to finish it. How prophetic. Mom, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My husband died yesterday. His funeral was this morning, and you're calling me about money for Sarah's wedding? Oh, sweetie, don't be dramatic. Michael would want us to be practical about these things. He always said family comes first. Actually, what Michael always said was that my family treated me like an ATM with legs, but apparently Mom had selective hearing when it came to his observations. The irony wasn't lost on me. You didn't come to the hospital when he was dying, I pointed out. You barely came to the funeral, but you called about money before his grave was even covered. We had prior commitments. Honey, Sarah's engagement party was planned months ago. Besides, Michael wouldn't have wanted us to miss such an important family celebration. The engagement party. Right. The same engagement that was announced the morning of my husband's funeral. Because apparently my sister couldn't wait one more day to steal whatever thunder I might have had left. The timing was so perfectly selfish, it was almost artistic. I sat in Michael's chair, running my fingers along the smooth leather armrests where his hands had rested during countless video calls with his business partners. He'd built an empire from nothing, and these people thought they could just waltz in and claim pieces of it like vultures picking at roadkill. I can't talk about this right now, I said finally. But Days, the wedding planner needs confirmation by Friday. If we don't secure the venue soon, Sarah might have to settle for something less elegant. You know how important this is to her. Important to her, not important to our family. Important to Sarah specifically, as if the universe revolved around my baby sister's wedding plans while I sat in a house that echoed with memories and the lingering scent of Michael's cologne. I said I can't talk about this right now. Don't be selfish, Days. This family has always been there when you needed us. And now it's time for you to support us. I hung up. The silence that followed felt different somehow. Heavier. Like the moment before lightning strikes when the air becomes electric with possibility. My mother had no idea what she'd just set in motion, but something inside me had fundamentally shifted during that conversation. Maybe it was grief making me reckless, or maybe I was finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. Either way, I had some phone calls to make. 2 years ago, I learned exactly what my family thought I was worth. Spoiler alert, it wasn't my sparkling personality they were after. I'd been married to Michael for 3 years at that point, but we'd kept our finances relatively private. He owned a successful tech consulting firm, I worked as a graphic designer, and we lived comfortably, but not ostentatiously. My family knew Michael had money, but they didn't know how much money until Forbes mentioned his company in an article about America's rising tech moguls under 40. The magazine hit newsstands on a Tuesday. By Wednesday evening, my phone was ringing off the hook. Mom called first, naturally. Days, honey, I had no idea Michael was so successful. The article says his company is worth over $50 million. Is that accurate? I should have lied. I should have laughed it off, made some joke about journalists exaggerating everything. Instead, I made the mistake of confirming that yes, the article was mostly accurate. And no, we weren't planning to change our lifestyle dramatically, just because some magazine noticed. By Friday, I had dinner invitations from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. The transformation was swift and shameless. Sarah, who had spent the previous 3 years making snide comments about my boring marriage and settling for someone older than me, suddenly wanted to know everything about Michael's business. She'd graduated from college with a degree in communications and a minor in spending other people's money. And she was between jobs again. "I've been thinking about getting into tech," she announced during a family barbecue that weekend. "Maybe Michael could give me some advice about breaking into the industry." David, my older brother, had been struggling with his restaurant for years. He'd borrowed money from our parents twice, both times with vague promises about paying it back once things picked up. Suddenly, he was very interested in discussing business expansion and investment opportunities. Even Dad, who had always been skeptical of Michael because he thought anyone who worked with computers all day couldn't be a real man, started asking pointed questions about portfolio diversification and retirement planning. The transformation was so complete and obvious that Michael noticed immediately. "Your family's suddenly very friendly," he observed after that barbecue, where half a dozen relatives had managed to corner him with various sob stories and business propositions. "They're just getting to know you better," I said. But even I didn't believe it. Michael was too polite to point out what we both knew, that they'd had 3 years to get to know him better, and they'd chosen not to until money entered the equation. He just squeezed my hand and said, "I love you, Days. I hope you know that whatever's mine is yours, but what's ours doesn't belong to anyone else." I thought I understood what he meant then. I had no idea how prophetic those words would become. The requests started small, as they always do. Dad mentioned needing help with some unexpected medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. Mom casually brought up that their car was making expensive noises, and they weren't sure how they'd afford the repairs. Sarah wanted to move to a better apartment, but needed help with the security deposit. Each request came with heartfelt speeches about family sticking together and helping each other through tough times. Each came with promises about paying us back as soon as possible. Each came with just enough guilt to make saying no feel cruel and ungrateful. Michael never said a word against helping them. He'd write the checks without complaint, never asking for timelines or signed agreements. But I caught him sometimes, looking thoughtful after particularly expensive family emergencies, like he was working through some complex equation in his head. "Your generosity is beautiful," he told me once after we'd covered David's third temporary cash flow problem. "Just remember that some people will take as much as you're willing to give, and they'll still want more." The thing about enabling family members is that it never actually solves their problems. It just makes their problems temporarily invisible while creating new ones for everyone involved. David's restaurant didn't improve because we paid his suppliers. He just stopped feeling urgency about finding real solutions. Sarah didn't become more responsible with money because we helped with her apartment. She just learned that financial emergencies weren't really emergencies if she had us to call. And me? I learned that buying your family's affection is exhausting, expensive, and ultimately futile. But I kept writing checks anyway, because the alternative felt like abandoning people I loved. 8 months ago, Michael started losing weight. Not the intentional kind where someone decides to get healthier, but the slow, concerning kind where clothes start hanging loose and friends ask if you're feeling all right. He brushed off my questions at first. "Work stress," he said. "Too many late nights, not enough regular meals." He'd been pushing hard to land a major contract with a healthcare consortium, and the proposal alone required months of preparation. I wanted to believe him because the alternative was terrifying. But when someone you love starts looking fragile, you notice things. How he pushed food around his plate during dinner. How he'd pause halfway up the stairs, not because he was winded, but because something hurt. How he'd get up in the middle of the night and pace the living room, thinking I was asleep. "Michael," I said one morning after watching him struggle to button his shirt, "you need to see a doctor." "I'm fine." "Days. Just tired." "You're not fine. You've lost at least 15 pounds in 2 months, and yesterday I caught you holding on to the kitchen counter like you were dizzy." He sat on the edge of our bed, shoulders sagging with exhaustion that went deeper than a few missed meals. "I know. I'll make an appointment this week." The appointment led to blood tests. The blood tests led to scans. The scans led to a biopsy. And the biopsy led to Dr. Patterson's office on a gray Thursday afternoon in March, where we learned that my 32-year-old husband had pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, metastatic. The kind of diagnosis that comes with statistics nobody wants to hear and treatment options that sound more like hopes than plans. "How long?" Michael asked, his voice steady in that way that meant he was working very hard to stay calm. "That's difficult to predict," Dr. Patterson said carefully. "With aggressive treatment, we're looking at months rather than years." I'm sorry. Months rather than years. 6 little words that redrew the entire map of our future. We drove home in silence, both of us processing what felt impossible to accept. In our driveway, Michael turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. "About my will, about the business, about what happens if—" "Don't," I interrupted. "We're going to fight this. We're going to get second opinions and find specialists and—" "Days." He took my hand, his fingers thinner than they'd been a month earlier. "I love your optimism, but I also love you too much to leave you unprepared. We need to have this conversation." So we did. That night, and many nights that followed, we talked about practical things and impossible things, about treatment options and bucket lists, about how much he wanted to see me happy again someday, and how terrified he was of leaving me alone with my family's expectations. "They're going to pressure you," he said during one of those late-night conversations. "After I'm gone, they'll see dollar signs where they should see grief. Promise me you won't let them take advantage of your generosity." I promised, not knowing how hard that promise would be to keep. The chemotherapy started 2 weeks later. Michael handled it with the same methodical approach he brought to everything else in his life. He researched side effects, prepared for the worst, and never complained about losing his hair or spending his days feeling nauseous. But my family? They were mostly nowhere to be found, though they made token appearances to maintain the illusion of caring. Mom called occasionally, always asking about his prognosis in that worried tone that sounded more concerned about our finances than his well-being. "How are the medical bills? Do you need help with anything?" She visited twice during his entire treatment, both times staying less than an hour and spending most of it talking about Sarah's latest job search. Sarah sent a few text messages and showed up once with flowers, but spent the visit taking selfies in our living room and posting them with captions about being there for family. She never called during his worst days, never offered to sit with him during chemo sessions so I could run errands. David stopped by occasionally, usually when he needed something, and would spend 20 minutes asking how Michael was feeling before pivoting to his restaurant's latest crisis, and whether we might be able to help. When Michael was too weak to work, when he couldn't keep food down for days at a time, when he'd wake up confused and scared in the middle of the night, my family was conveniently busy with their own lives. But when the latest medical bills arrived, when insurance denied coverage for an experimental treatment, when we needed to liquidate some investments to pay for round-the-clock nursing care, suddenly, they had strong opinions about our spending and gentle suggestions about more cost-effective approaches to his care. Have you ever experienced someone's true priorities during a crisis? Share your story in the comments below. The morning of Michael's funeral was unseasonably warm for November, the kind of day he would have called perfect for sitting on our back deck with coffee and the crossword puzzle. Instead, I was choosing between 2 black dresses, both of which felt wrong for saying goodbye to the only man who'd ever truly seen me. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., moving through our house like a ghost, touching things that still smelled like him. His coffee mug in the sink, the book he'd been reading. Bookmark placed optimistically on page 47, like he'd planned to finish it. His side of the closet, where his shirts hung in the precise color order he preferred. The funeral director had said to expect around 200 people. Michael's business partners, college friends, former colleagues, clients who'd become friends over the years, people who'd known him before I did, people who'd watched him build something meaningful from nothing. My phone buzzed at 7:30. A text from Mom. "Running a bit behind. Sarah's hair appointment took longer than expected. Save us seats up front. Sarah's hair appointment." On the morning of my husband's funeral, I stared at that message for a long time, trying to find an interpretation that didn't make me want to throw my phone against the wall. Maybe she'd wanted to look presentable for such a solemn occasion. Maybe perfect hair was her way of showing respect. But deep down, I knew better. This was Sarah making sure she looked picture-perfect for the inevitable social media posts. The service was beautiful in the way that Michael would have appreciated. Simple, honest, focused on the impact he'd made rather than empty platitudes about God's plan or everything happening for a reason. His business partner spoke about Michael's integrity. His college roommate shared stories about his terrible cooking and his habit of adopting stray cats. His sister Jennifer talked about how he'd welcomed me into their family like I'd always belonged there. I noticed the empty spaces in the front row where my parents and siblings should have been sitting. Jennifer noticed too, squeezing my hand during the eulogy like she was trying to anchor me to something solid. They arrived during the final prayer, slipping into seats near the back. Mom wore a navy blue dress that was more appropriate for a business meeting than a funeral. Sarah wore a stunning emerald green outfit that complemented her newly styled hair perfectly. David looked like he'd gotten dressed in a hurry, his tie crooked and his shirt wrinkled. After the service, as people filed past to offer condolences, my family formed their own receiving line near the chapel doors. I watched from across the room as they chatted with Michael's colleagues, introducing themselves as Daze's family and accepting sympathy like they'd suffered a personal loss. The burial was private, just immediate family and closest friends. Michael's parents had died in a car accident when he was 25, so his sister Jennifer stood beside me as the only family he had left. On my other side, there was supposed to be space for my parents and siblings. They weren't there. "Where's your family?" Jennifer whispered as the pastor began the graveside service. I didn't know. They'd been at the chapel an hour earlier, but somehow they'd disappeared before the procession to the cemetery. I tried calling Mom's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. So I buried my husband with Jennifer holding one hand and Michael's best friend from college holding the other, while my family was doing something they considered more important than supporting me through the worst day of my life. I found out what that something was when I finally made it home that evening. Sarah's engagement photos were all over social media. Professional shots of her and her fiancé looking blissfully happy at some picturesque outdoor location. The timestamp showed they'd been posted at 2:30 in the afternoon, right around the time Michael's casket was being lowered into the ground. The caption read, "Best day ever. Can't wait to marry my soulmate." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the comments from my extended family, all congratulating Sarah and my parents for such wonderful news. All posted while I was throwing dirt onto my husband's grave. Aunt Lucy, "Such exciting news." "Patricia, you must be over the moon." Mom's response, "We're absolutely thrilled. Sarah deserves all the happiness in the world." Cousin Mark, "Congratulations. When's the big day?" Sarah's response, "Next summer. We're thinking June. It's going to be absolutely magical." I screenshot every comment. Not because I wanted to torture myself, but because I needed proof that this had actually happened. That my family had chosen to celebrate my sister's engagement on the day I buried my husband. My phone rang at 9 p.m. Mom's name on the screen. "Honey, how was the rest of the service?" "I'm so sorry we missed the burial." But Sarah's photographer only had a small window of availability, and the lighting was just perfect for her engagement shots. I hung up without saying a word. 20 minutes later, Sarah called. "Daze, Mom said you seemed upset. I hope you understand that we didn't plan for the timing to work out this way. But the photographer was only available today, and we'd already paid the deposit, and the weather was so perfect." I hung up on her too. Then I sat in Michael's study, surrounded by the life we'd built together, and realized that my family had just shown me exactly where I ranked in their priorities. And for the first time in my adult life, that clarity didn't devastate me. It liberated me. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that felt almost supernatural, like someone had wiped away 28 years of fog and let me see my family with perfect, brutal honesty for the first time. I made myself coffee in Michael's favorite mug, a stupid, sentimental gesture that somehow felt necessary, and sat at our kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad. If my family wanted to talk about money, we were going to talk about money. But first, I was going to do some math that would make a CPA weep. 2 years of family emergencies and temporary loans add up quickly when you write them all down. Dad's medical bills, $8,000. Mom's car repairs, $6,000. Sarah's apartment deposits, $4,000. David's restaurant bailouts, $15,000 over 3 separate crises. Christmas presents, birthday gifts, family vacation contributions, and dozens of smaller requests that seemed insignificant individually, but formed a staggering total. $47,000 in 2 years. Not counting the bigger gifts, like the $5,000 we'd contributed to David's restaurant renovation, or the $10,000 we'd given my parents for their anniversary cruise. $62,000 that my family had treated like pocket change while Michael was dying, and I was watching our savings account drain for medical bills. The irony wasn't lost on me that they'd spent more on frivolous expenses in 2 years than Michael's entire cancer treatment had cost us out of pocket. But then again, their emergencies had always seemed more urgent than our actual emergencies. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Family financial history, a complete review. Then I listed every single expense, complete with dates, amounts, and whether the money had ever been repaid. The answer to that last part was universally no, but I included a column for it anyway. Call it optimistic bookkeeping. Michael's voice echoed in my memory. "Some people will take as much as you're willing to give, and they'll still want more." My phone started ringing around 10 a.m. Mom again, probably wondering why I hadn't called back to grovel about yesterday's misunderstanding. Days, I know yesterday was emotional, but we really do need to discuss the trust fund situation. Sarah's wedding planner called, and if we don't put down a deposit by Friday— Mom, I interrupted, I want to ask you something. Do you remember how much money you've borrowed from Michael and me over the past 2 years? Silence. Then, borrowed? Honey, that wasn't borrowing. That was family helping family. Right. Family helping family. So, when I was spending 18-hour days at the hospital with Michael, when I was researching experimental treatments and fighting with insurance companies and trying to keep him comfortable while he was dying, that was a good time for family to help family, wasn't it? That's different. Days. You know we would have been there if we could. But serious illness is so personal, and we thought you needed space to— Where were you? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Where exactly were you when Michael was too weak to get out of bed? When he was throwing up from chemo? When he woke up scared and confused at 3 a.m? We didn't want to intrude. Besides, we had our own responsibilities. You thought wrong about what I needed. Another silence. Longer this time. Days, you're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. Once you've had time to process everything, you'll realize that Michael would want us to use his money to help the family. He loved us. He loved me, I corrected. He tolerated the rest of you because I asked him to. That's a horrible thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. Which brings me to my next point about the trust fund. I could practically hear her straightening in her chair, getting ready to discuss numbers and logistics like we were negotiating a business contract. There isn't going to be any money for Sarah's wedding, I said. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. No money. Not from the trust fund, not from Michael's life insurance, not from me personally. Nothing. Days, you can't be serious. We're family. You're right. We are family. And when Michael was dying, our family consisted of me, him, and his sister Jennifer. The rest of you were busy with engagement parties and restaurant problems and hair appointments. You're being incredibly selfish. The word hung in the air between us. Selfish. Coming from a woman who'd called me about money less than 24 hours after my husband's funeral. You know what, Mom? You're absolutely right. I am being selfish. For the first time in my adult life, I'm going to be completely, unapologetically selfish with the money my husband left me. And what exactly does that mean? I looked around our kitchen, at the breakfast nook where Michael and I had planned our future, at the window where morning light streamed across surfaces he'd never touch again. It means I'm done being your personal bank account. What my family never understood was that marrying Michael didn't just give me access to his money. It gave me access to his family, a family that actually knew what love looked like without a price tag attached. Jennifer was 7 years older than Michael, a pediatric nurse with 3 kids and a mortgage she could barely afford. She lived in a modest house 40 minutes outside the city, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and had never once asked us for financial help despite struggling with her husband's medical expenses after his heart attack 2 years earlier. Instead, she'd invited us for dinner every month, included me in family traditions, and treated me like the sister she'd never had, rather than an inconvenience she had to tolerate for her brother's sake. When Michael got sick, Jennifer rearranged her work schedule to drive him to chemo appointments when I couldn't get away from handling his business affairs. She researched treatment options, called doctors, and spent her days off sitting in hospital waiting rooms without ever complaining about the inconvenience. She'd held my hand during Michael's last breath and helped me choose the music for his funeral. She'd organized the reception afterward, fielding phone calls from his business associates and making sure I ate something during the longest day of my life. And she'd never once mentioned money, inheritance, or what Michael might have wanted regarding his estate. That's what real family looks like. And it was becoming increasingly clear that I'd been settling for a pale imitation of it for 28 years. The contrast was so stark it was almost comical. 2 days after cutting off my family's access to Michael's estate, I drove to Jennifer's house with a proposal that honored both Michael's wishes and my newfound clarity about who deserved our generosity. She answered the door in scrubs, having just gotten home from a 12-hour shift at the children's hospital. Her youngest daughter was doing homework at the kitchen table, while something that smelled like spaghetti sauce simmered on the stove. Days, what a nice surprise. Emma, say hi to Aunt Days. Aunt Days. It still gave me chills, the casual way she'd integrated me into her family from the moment Michael first brought me home for dinner. I need to talk to you about something, I said. Something Michael and I discussed before he died. We sat on her back porch while Emma finished her homework inside. Jennifer listened without interrupting as I explained my family's recent behavior, their demands for wedding money, and my decision to cut them off completely. "I'm sorry, Days," she said when I finished. "I can't imagine how much that must have hurt, especially right now." "That's not why I'm here," I said. "I'm here because Michael always said you were the strongest person he knew. He said you raised 3 kids while working full-time and taking care of everyone else in your life, and you never complained about how hard it was." She smiled, the tired smile of someone who'd been carrying heavy burdens for a long time. "That's life. You do what needs to be done. Michael wanted to help you more than he did," I continued. "We talked about it many times, but he was afraid you'd see it as charity and refuse. He helped plenty. All those birthday presents for the kids that were way too expensive, the groceries he'd bring over after grocery shopping. I knew he was taking care of us. That was nothing compared to what he wanted to do, what we both wanted to do." I pulled the envelope from my purse. Inside were legal documents I'd had prepared that morning, along with a letter Michael had written but never had the courage to give her. "I've decided to honor Michael's wishes about his estate," I explained carefully. "Half of everything goes to you and the kids. The house, the business, the investments, all of it." Jennifer's face went pale. "Days, no. That's your money now. You're his wife. I'm his widow," I corrected gently. "And as his widow, it's my responsibility to make sure his wishes are honored. He wanted to know that you and the kids would be okay, that Emma could go to college without you working yourself to death to pay for it." She started to cry then, not the polite tears of someone trying to maintain composure, but the raw, exhausted tears of someone who'd been strong for too long. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "You can and you will," I said firmly, feeling more certain of anything than I had in months. "Because that's what family does for family. And you've been more family to me in 5 years than my actual family has been in 28. What about your parents? Your siblings? Won't they contest this?" I thought about my mother's phone calls, Sarah's engagement party, David's restaurant emergencies. Then I thought about the legal complexities ahead and the tax implications I'd spent hours discussing with Michael's attorney. "Let them try," I said. "Michael's will is ironclad, and I have documented proof of exactly how my biological family treated us when we needed them most. Plus, this transfer has been structured properly to minimize tax implications and legal challenges." That night, I sat in our empty house and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace mixed with a growing strength I didn't fully recognize yet. For the first time since Michael's diagnosis, I was making decisions based on love rather than obligation. I was honoring his memory by taking care of the people who'd actually cared about him. And I was finally free from the weight of trying to buy affection from people who'd never truly valued me anyway. My phone buzzed with another text from Sarah about wedding venues, but I didn't even look at it. I had more important things to focus on now, and a growing sense that this was just the beginning of reclaiming my life. Within a week of signing the papers with Jennifer, the ripple effects of my decision reached every corner of my family's carefully constructed financial house of cards. The dominoes fell with satisfying precision. It started with David's restaurant. Apparently, he'd been telling his suppliers that his next payment from his sister's rich husband would cover outstanding invoices. When those payments didn't materialize, and when his usual emergency calls to me went straight to voicemail, the suppliers stopped being patient. I learned about this from my Aunt Rachel, who called with breathless urgency to tell me that David's restaurant was being threatened with closure over unpaid bills. "Honey, I know you're grieving, but David is desperate. He says you're not taking his calls. Could I maybe just what?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she planned to finish that sentence. "Well, help him out, just this once? He's family. Just this once." That phrase had been the soundtrack to 2 years of financial bleeding, and hearing it again actually made me laugh. The audacity was almost impressive. "Aunt Rachel, do you know how much money David has borrowed from me over the past 2 years? I'm sure it wasn't that much. $15,000 for various restaurant emergencies, not counting the $5,000 for his renovation or the $2,000 for his equipment repairs, all of which he promised to pay back as soon as business picked up." Silence. "And do you know where David was when my husband was dying? When I was sitting in chemotherapy waiting rooms and calling insurance companies and watching the only man who ever truly loved me waste away to nothing?" More silence. "He was texting me about needing money for new restaurant equipment. Not once did he ask how Michael was feeling or offer to help with anything that didn't involve his own problems. Days, that's not fair. People handle illness differently and—" "You're right," I interrupted, feeling my confidence grow with each word. "Some people handle illness by showing up. Others handle it by asking for money while you're burying your husband. I ended the call, but the conversations with other family members followed the same pattern. Everyone had heard about David's crisis. Everyone thought I should fix it. Nobody seemed to remember that I was a widow who'd buried her husband less than 2 weeks ago. Sarah's situation was deteriorating even faster. Without access to Michael's money, her dream wedding was evaporating like morning dew. The $40,000 venue deposit she'd confidently promised was due in 3 days, and her savings account contained approximately $400. Her increasingly frantic text messages were almost entertaining in their desperation. Days, I know we haven't talked much lately, but could you call me? It's about the wedding, and I really need your help. 2 hours later, please call me back. The wedding planner is asking about the venue deposit. 4 hours later, I don't understand why you're being like this. Michael would want you to help family. The next morning, Mom says you're still grieving and not thinking clearly. Please just call me when you're feeling better. By afternoon, this is ridiculous. We're family. You can't just abandon us because you're having some kind of breakdown. That last message crossed a line I didn't even know I had. Calling my decision to protect Michael's memory a breakdown revealed exactly how little my sister understood about loyalty, grief, or basic human decency. I called her back immediately. Time to test out this new voice I was finding. Sarah. Days. Finally. Listen, I know this timing is terrible, but I really need... Stop talking, I said calmly. I have something to tell you. She stopped. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm not grieving so hard that I can't think straight. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Okay, but about the wedding deposit. There is no wedding deposit coming from me. There's no money for your dress, your flowers, your photographer, or your reception. Nothing. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. And do you know why? I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, probably calculating how much she'd have to scale back her princess fantasies. Because when Michael was dying, you cared more about your engagement photo shoot than supporting me through the worst day of my life. Because when I needed family, you were getting your hair done for a party. That's not fair. We didn't plan for the timing to work out like that. The timing worked out exactly like you planned it, I said, feeling stronger with each word. You planned an engagement party for the day of my husband's funeral. You planned to announce your happiness while I was burying the love of my life. You planned to make my grief about your celebration. We thought it might cheer you up seeing something positive happening. I hung up. The beautiful thing about finally setting boundaries is that it clarifies everything. No more wondering whether your family truly cares about you. No more making excuses for their behavior. No more pretending that love looks like using someone until they're empty. My phone rang again immediately. Mom's number. I answered on the first ring, ready for whatever came next. Before you say anything, I told her, I want you to know that I've given half of Michael's estate to his sister Jennifer. The paperwork is finalized, the tax implications handled, and it's completely legal. The silence that followed was so complete, I thought the call had dropped. You did what? She finally whispered. What do you think will happen next? Will my family accept these boundaries? Or will they try something even more desperate to get their hands on Michael's money? Drop your predictions in the comments below. The nuclear fallout from my financial independence arrived in waves, each one more desperate and creative than the last. Wave 1 was denial. For 3 days after my conversation with Mom, my phone stayed mercifully quiet. I imagine they spent that time convinced that grief had temporarily affected my judgment, and I'd come to my senses once I'd had time to process everything rationally. They were wrong, but I appreciated the brief respite. Wave 2 was bargaining mixed with guilt-tripping. Sarah showed up at my house unannounced on Thursday morning, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, clutching printouts of canceled wedding vendors and venue contracts. I watched through the security camera as she rang the doorbell repeatedly, then started pounding on the door when I didn't answer. She knew I was home. My car was in the driveway, but I had no intention of letting her manipulate me with tears I suspected were more frustrated than heartbroken. Days, please, she called through the door. I know you're in there. I just need 5 minutes to explain what's happening. I could have explained what was happening in one sentence. Your actions have consequences. But I didn't owe her that lesson, and I certainly didn't owe her my time. After 20 minutes of pleading, she left a handwritten letter tucked under my doormat. I read it that evening with my second glass of wine, marveling at how someone could write 3 pages about their problems without mentioning my loss even once. The letter was a masterpiece of self-centered manipulation. She described her devastation over having to cancel her dream wedding, her embarrassment at having to tell her fiance's family that she couldn't afford the celebration they'd planned, and her heartbreak over my apparent decision to abandon family during her time of need. Not one word about Michael. Not one acknowledgement of what I was going through. Just 3 pages of detailed explanations about why her problems should matter more to me than my own grief. I threw the letter away without responding, though I did save a photo of it for my growing documentation file. Wave 3 was anger with a healthy dose of character assassination. David called me at 11 p.m. on Friday, drunk and furious, and apparently under the impression that yelling would accomplish what tears and manipulation had failed to achieve. "You selfish witch," he slurred into the phone. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My restaurant is finished. Finished. Because my own sister decided to throw a tantrum instead of helping family." "David," I said calmly, "you're drunk. Go to sleep. Don't you dare hang up on me. I'm not finished." "Actually, you are finished. Your restaurant was failing long before Michael died. And it was failing because you're a terrible businessman who thinks family guilt is a sustainable business model. That's not true. I just needed a little help to get over the rough patch, and then you needed $15,000 to get over the rough patch. Then you needed $5,000 more for renovations. Then $2,000 for equipment. How much more help did you need before you'd actually succeed at something? That's different. Those were investments." "No, David. Those were gifts. Gifts that my dying husband agreed to give you because he loved me and I asked him to help you. Gifts that you never acknowledged, never appreciated, and never repaid. I was going to pay you back when what? When would you have paid us back? After Michael died and you thought you could keep borrowing from his estate? After you'd milked his memory for every penny you could squeeze out of me?" The silence stretched long enough that I thought he'd hung up. "You've changed," he said finally, his voice quieter but still bitter. "Money changed you. You used to care about family." "You're right," I said, feeling oddly proud of this accusation. "I did change. I learned the difference between family that loves you and family that loves your bank account." I hung up and turned off my phone, feeling more powerful than I had since Michael's diagnosis. Wave 4 was desperation with a touch of legal intimidation. Mom called from Dad's phone on Saturday morning, probably assuming I'd answer if I didn't recognize the number. "Days, we need to talk about this situation before it goes too far." "Which situation?" "Don't play games with me." "You know exactly what situation. This nonsense about giving away half of Michael's money." "It's not nonsense, and it's not half of Michael's money. It's half of my money, which I chose to give to people who actually cared about my husband." "That's what we need to discuss. Your father has been talking to a lawyer. And apparently there are legal challenges we can make if you're not mentally competent to handle financial decisions so soon after a traumatic loss." I sat down hard in Michael's desk chair, the audacity of the threat hitting me like cold water. Even after everything, they could still surprise me with their ruthlessness. "Are you threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent? We're trying to protect you from making decisions you'll regret later, and trying to protect Michael's legacy from being squandered on people who aren't even real family." "People who aren't real family," I repeated slowly. "You mean like Jennifer? Who drove Michael to chemotherapy appointments when I couldn't get away from work? Who researched treatment options and held my hand during his last breath? Who organized his funeral reception because I was too destroyed to think straight?" "That's not the same thing as—" "Or do you mean people like Sarah, who scheduled her engagement party for the day of his funeral? Like David, who asked for money while Michael was dying? Like you, who called me about wedding funding before my husband's grave was even covered? We're your family, Days. We love you." "No," I said quietly, the truth crystallizing with perfect clarity. "You love what you thought I could give you. And when you realized I wouldn't keep giving it, you threatened to have me declared insane. That's not what we—" "Let me make something very clear, Mom. If you or Dad or anyone else in this family tries to challenge my mental competency, I will release every text message, every voicemail, and every documented conversation we've had since Michael's diagnosis. I will make it public record exactly how you treated us when we needed support. You wouldn't dare. Try me." For the first time in my adult life, my mother had nothing to say. The legal threat was apparently a bluff, because nobody contacted any lawyers about my competency. Instead, my family launched what I can only describe as a coordinated guilt campaign designed to wear down my resistance through sheer emotional exhaustion. It started with the extended family. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years began calling with carefully scripted messages about family unity and forgiveness. Aunt Rachel sent a sympathy card with a handwritten note about how Michael would want me to be generous with his legacy. Uncle Tom forwarded me a Facebook post about the importance of maintaining family bonds during difficult times. Each message followed the same basic template: acknowledge my grief, express concern for my emotional state, then pivot to gentle suggestions about reconsidering my harsh decisions regarding family support. The coordination was so obvious it would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. Did they really think I couldn't recognize a mass manipulation campaign? The audacity was almost impressive. But the most manipulative attempt came from an unexpected source: Sarah's fiancé, Marcus. I'd met Marcus exactly 3 times during their 2-year relationship. He seemed like a decent guy, stable job as an accountant, no obvious red flags, genuinely appeared to love Sarah despite her high-maintenance tendencies. I'd assumed he was just another casualty of my family's dysfunction, caught in the crossfire of our financial melodrama. I was wrong. He showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening with flowers and a speech that had clearly been rehearsed. The poor guy probably had no idea what he was walking into. Days, I know this is an uncomfortable situation, but I was hoping we could talk about Sarah and the wedding. I almost felt sorry for him. He looked nervous and sincere, like someone who genuinely believed he could fix a complicated family problem with good intentions and reasonable conversation. Marcus, I'm not changing my mind about funding Sarah's wedding. I'm not here to ask for money, he said quickly. I just want you to understand what this is doing to Sarah. She's devastated. She feels like she's lost her sister on top of everything else. She lost her sister when she chose to celebrate her engagement on the day I buried my husband. He winced. Look, I know the timing was terrible. I told her we should postpone the announcement, but she was so excited and she thought maybe some good news would help balance out the sadness. Marcus, stop. You seem like a good person, so I'm going to be honest with you. Sarah didn't postpone her announcement because she thought good news would help me. She didn't postpone it because she's incapable of letting anyone else be the center of attention, even when that attention is for something as tragic as a funeral. That's not fair. You're her sister. She loves you. Does she? Because in my experience, people who love you don't schedule celebrations on your worst days. People who love you don't ask for money while you're grieving. People who love you don't threaten legal action when you stop funding their lifestyle. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Legal action? What are you talking about? So, he didn't know about Mom's competency threat. Interesting that Sarah hadn't shared that particular detail with her fiancé. Nothing that concerns you? I said. But I have a question for you. If you love Sarah, why are you here asking me to fund a wedding you can't afford? We can afford a wedding, he said defensively. Just not the wedding she wants. Then have the wedding you can afford? It's not that simple. Her family expectations, the social pressure. Marcus, I interrupted gently, if Sarah can't marry you without a $40,000 reception, then she's not ready to marry you at all. Marriage is about building a life together, not throwing a party that impresses other people. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing the truth of what I'd said. I actually felt bad for the guy. He was clearly starting to realize that he might be marrying into more dysfunction than he'd bargained for. She says you used to be different, before you had money. She says you used to be more generous, more caring about family. I used to be a doormat, I corrected. There's a difference between being generous and being used. So that's it? You're just going to let your relationship with your entire family fall apart over money? I thought about Michael's last weeks, when Jennifer had slept in our guest room so she could help with his care, while my biological family was busy with their own lives. I thought about the relief I'd felt signing papers that would ensure Jennifer's kids could go to college without crushing debt. I thought about the peace I'd found in finally honoring my husband's wishes, instead of everyone else's expectations. Marcus, I said finally, my relationship with my family didn't fall apart over money. It fell apart because money was the only thing holding it together. He left without the flowers, probably recognizing that his mission had failed spectacularly. I hoped for his sake that he'd take our conversation to heart. That night, I called Jennifer to check on her kids and ended up staying on the phone for 2 hours, talking about everything and nothing the way real family does. Emma had gotten an A on her science project. Jake was learning to drive. Michael's life insurance had allowed Jennifer to pay off her mortgage and start college funds for all 3 kids. I can't thank you enough, she said for the 100th time since we'd signed the papers. You don't need to thank me, I told her. This is what Michael wanted, taking care of the people who took care of him. Still, I know it can't be easy, having your family angry with you. Actually, I said, surprising myself with the honesty, it's easier than I thought it would be. I spent so many years walking on eggshells, trying to keep everyone happy. I forgot how good it feels to make decisions based on love instead of guilt. Michael would be proud of you. I hope so. I know so. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and realized something important. I wasn't lonely. For the first time since Michael's death, I wasn't drowning in grief or anger or confusion. I was just peaceful. Tomorrow would bring more family drama, more manipulation attempts, more people trying to convince me that loyalty meant funding their problems. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. 3 weeks after my conversation with Marcus, I received a registered letter that made my mother's competency threat look like amateur hour. This was the nuclear option. The return address was from Peterson, Williams & Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. The letter was formal, threatening, and absolutely infuriating in its implications and legal overreach. "Dear Ms. Harrison," it began, using my maiden name instead of my married name, "we represent the interests of David Harrison regarding concerns about the irregular distribution of assets from the estate of Michael Thompson." David Harrison. My brother had apparently convinced some lawyer that he had legal standing to challenge how I'd distributed my dead husband's money. The audacity was breathtaking. The letter went on to describe credible evidence of my diminished capacity due to traumatic grief and suspicious circumstances surrounding my decision to divert marital assets to non-family members instead of supporting my blood relatives, who had legitimate expectations of inheritance. Every phrase was carefully chosen to make me sound either mentally incompetent or financially abusive. They claimed that Michael's will needed to be re-examined in light of my erratic behavior following his death. They suggested that undue influence might have been exerted by Jennifer and her family. They demanded a complete accounting of all estate assets and threatened legal action if I didn't comply within 30 days. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each paragraph. Then I called the one person I knew could help me destroy this ridiculous legal fiction. Michael's business attorney was a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Wong who had helped him structure his entire estate plan. She'd also been present during every conversation Michael and I had about our wishes for the money after his death. "Patricia, I need your help. My family is trying to contest Michael's will. On what grounds?" I read her the entire letter, including the parts about my supposed diminished capacity and suspicious circumstances. "Who's their attorney?" "Peterson, Williams & Associates." She snorted. "Bob Peterson. I should have known. He specializes in frivolous family disputes and hoping for quick settlements from people who don't want the hassle of fighting. Can they actually do this? Can they contest the will?" "They can try," Patricia said grimly. "But they're going to lose, and it's going to cost them a lot of money. Michael's will is ironclad, and we have documentation of every conversation about his wishes. Plus, you transferred assets that belong to you legally after the will was probated. They have no standing whatsoever. But the letter says a lot of things designed to scare you into giving them money. That's Bob Peterson's entire business model. Intimidate people with legal threats and hope they settle rather than fight. What do? We file a counter motion for frivolous litigation and request attorney fees. Then we depose your entire family under oath and make them explain exactly why they think they're entitled to money from a man they couldn't be bothered to visit while he was dying. The thought of my family having to testify under oath about their behavior during Michael's illness was almost enough to make me smile. How long will this take? 6 months, maybe longer. But days. I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. They're going to try to destroy your reputation, question your mental health, and make every private moment of your marriage part of public record. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Michael's last conversation with me about his money. How he'd made me promise not to let my family take advantage of my generosity. How he'd specifically mentioned wanting to ensure Jennifer's kids could go to college. "Patricia, if we win this, can we make them pay my legal fees?" "Absolutely. And we can pursue sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit." "Then yes, I'm prepared. Because if they want to fight, they're going to get one." The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I went on the offensive. I called a family meeting. Not a gentle conversation or a negotiated discussion, but a formal meeting with an agenda and consequences. I sent identical text messages to my parents. "Sarah and David, family meeting this Saturday at 2 p.m. My house. We're going to settle this once and for all." Sarah tried to call immediately, probably hoping to negotiate terms beforehand. I didn't answer. David texted back asking if this meant I was coming to my senses about the money situation. I didn't respond. Mom called 3 times and left increasingly anxious voicemails asking what I planned to discuss and whether I was feeling better about everything. I ignored all of them. By Saturday morning, I was ready. I'd printed out every text message, every voicemail transcript, and every documented conversation we'd had since Michael's diagnosis. I'd prepared a timeline of their requests for money versus their offers of support during his illness. I'd organized 2 years' worth of financial assistance into neat columns showing exactly how much they'd taken and how little they'd given back. Most importantly, I'd prepared myself emotionally for the conversation I should have had years ago. They arrived together, which told me they'd coordinated their approach. Mom carried herself with the regal bearing she adopted when she wanted to appear authoritative. Dad looked uncomfortable but determined. Sarah had been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy in a way that suggested genuine distress rather than strategic tears. David looked angry and defensive, like someone preparing for a fight he expected to lose. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the living room where Michael and I had hosted them for countless family dinners. "We need to talk." "Days," Mom began immediately. "If this is about that lawyer's letter, we can explain." "You'll get your chance to explain," I said calmly. "But first, I'm going to show you exactly what the past 2 years have looked like from my perspective." I spread the documents across the coffee table like evidence in a criminal trial. This is what family helping family actually looks like when you add it up. The silence in my living room was deafening as my family stared at the evidence spread across the coffee table. 2 years of financial dependency laid out in black and white, impossible to deny or minimize. Mom recovered first, straightening in her chair with the practiced dignity of someone accustomed to talking her way out of uncomfortable situations. "Days, honey, this is exactly what we were worried about. You're treating family relationships like business transactions. Love isn't about keeping score." "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Love isn't about keeping score, but exploitation is about taking advantage of love, and that's what this is." I picked up the timeline I'd prepared, showing their requests for money mapped against Michael's illness. "Let's talk about love, Mom. Let's talk about how you called me for money 3 days after Michael started chemotherapy. Let's talk about how David texted me about restaurant equipment while I was sitting in an oncology waiting room. Let's talk about how Sarah scheduled her engagement party for the day of my husband's funeral." "That's not fair," Sarah interjected, her voice thick with tears. "You're making it sound like we didn't care about Michael." "Didn't you? Because here's what caring looks like to me." I pulled out another document, Jennifer's phone records, which she'd given me permission to use. Michael's sister called or texted me every single day during his treatment. She drove him to appointments, researched doctors, and rearranged her work schedule to help with his care. I looked directly at David. "Your sister-in-law worked 12-hour shifts at a children's hospital and still found time to sit with my dying husband. What's your excuse?" "I had my own business to run," David said defensively. "I couldn't just drop everything, but you could drop everything to ask for money when your business was failing." Dad cleared his throat, the gesture he'd always used to assert authority during family conflicts. "Days, we understand you're angry, but threatening legal action against your own family?" "I didn't threaten legal action," I corrected. "You did. You hired a lawyer to contest my husband's will because you couldn't accept that I'd stopped funding your lifestyle." "We hired a lawyer to protect you," Mom said firmly. "You're not thinking clearly. Giving away half of Michael's estate to people who aren't even related to you." "People who aren't related to me," I repeated slowly. "Mom, do you know what Jennifer said when I told her about the inheritance?" She cried, not because she was getting money, but because she said it meant Michael had considered her family. I stood up, needing to move as the emotions I'd been suppressing threatened to overwhelm me. "Do you know what Jennifer did during the last week of Michael's life? She took vacation days she couldn't afford to lose and slept on our guest room floor so she could help with his care. She researched hospice options and argued with insurance companies and held my hand while I made impossible decisions about his treatment." I turned to face them directly, these people who shared my DNA, but had never understood my heart. "And do you know what she said when I offered her the money? She said she couldn't accept it because it belonged to me. I had to convince her to take financial security for her children because she was too selfless to ask for help." "That's very touching," Mom said coldly. "But it doesn't change the fact that we're your real family." "No," I said quietly. "You're my biological family. There's a difference." The truth of that statement hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years and finally burst into flames. Sarah was crying openly now, not the manipulative tears she'd used to get her way since childhood, but the raw, ugly tears of someone whose world was collapsing. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "We've always been family. We've always helped each other." "You've always taken help," I corrected gently. "There's a difference between helping each other and having one person pay for everyone else's problems." "But families support each other through difficult times," Dad said, his voice uncertain for the first time in my memory. "You're right, they do. So where were you when I was supporting my husband through the most difficult time of his life?" Where was the family support when I was watching the love of my life die and trying to keep his business running and fighting with insurance companies and planning a funeral I wasn't ready to plan? Silence. I'll tell you where you were. You were asking for money for restaurant equipment and wedding deposits and car repairs. You were treating my tragedy like a funding opportunity. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted by the weight of finally speaking truths I'd been carrying for years. The lawyer's letter was the final straw, I continued. You accused me of diminished capacity because I chose to honor my husband's wishes, instead of continuing to enable your financial irresponsibility. You threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent because I wouldn't keep paying for Sarah's princess fantasies and David's failed business ventures. We were trying to protect you, Mom insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. You were trying to control me, and when control didn't work, you tried intimidation. And when intimidation failed, you hired a lawyer to force me to give you money I earned and inherited legally. I pulled out one final document, Patricia Wong's response to their legal threat, which outlined exactly how weak their case was and how much their legal challenge would cost them. But here's what you didn't consider. Michael's will is ironclad. Every financial decision I made was legal, documented, and witnessed. And your lawyer's attempt to contest the will is going to cost you more money than you've ever borrowed from me. David's face went pale. What do you mean? I mean, we're countersuing for frivolous litigation and attorney fees. We're requesting sanctions. And when this goes to court, you're going to have to testify under oath about exactly how you treated Michael and me during his illness and after his death. You can't be serious, Mom whispered. I'm completely serious. You wanted a legal fight? You're going to get one. And when it's over, you're going to pay my attorney fees and court costs. Patricia estimates that could be upwards of $50,000. I stood up again, moving toward the front door in a clear signal that the meeting was over. But I'm going to give you one chance to avoid all of that. Drop the lawsuit within 48 hours. Acknowledge that my financial decisions are mine to make. Stop trying to manipulate me into funding your problems. And maybe someday, we can figure out what an actual family relationship looks like. And if we don't? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at each of them. These people who had shaped my childhood and influenced my choices, and taught me that love came with price tags and conditions. Then you'll find out what it really costs to lose me. 6 weeks later, I sat in Patricia Wong's office signing papers that officially ended my family's legal challenge, and wondering why I felt more relieved than victorious. The lawsuit had collapsed exactly as Patricia predicted, but not without a fight. Bob Peterson had initially pushed forward with discovery, apparently convinced that my family could find some legal angle to challenge the will. What they found instead was a paper trail that documented every interaction, every request for money, and every absence during Michael's illness. When faced with depositions where they'd have to testify under oath about their behavior, David's restaurant crisis, and their absence during the funeral burial, they'd finally capitulated. My family was now responsible for both Peterson's fees and mine. Approximately $47,000 in total legal costs that would probably take them years to pay off. They're requesting a meeting, Patricia told me as I finished signing the settlement documents. Through their attorney. They want to discuss terms for dropping any future challenges. What kind of terms? Full acknowledgement that they have no claim to Michael's estate. Written apology for the frivolous litigation. Agreement that they won't contest any future financial decisions you make. Basically, complete surrender. I considered this for a moment. 3 months ago, I would have seen it as an opportunity for reconciliation. Now it just felt like paperwork. Set it up, I said finally. But make it clear that this is a legal settlement, not a family reunion. The meeting took place the following week in a sterile conference room that felt appropriate for the sterile relationships we were trying to resolve. My family looked smaller somehow, diminished by months of legal stress and financial consequences. Sarah had lost weight and looked exhausted. Her wedding to Marcus had been postponed indefinitely, not canceled, but scaled back to something they could actually afford. I suspected Marcus was having second thoughts about marrying into this level of dysfunction. David's restaurant had closed permanently, though he'd found work managing someone else's establishment. My parents looked older, worn down by the stress of legal bills and the public embarrassment of having their family dysfunction exposed in court filings. We want to apologize, Mom said formally, reading from a prepared statement. We acknowledge that our legal challenge was inappropriate, and that Days has the right to make her own financial decisions. It was exactly the kind of non-apology I'd expected. Technically correct, but completely lacking in genuine remorse or understanding. Is that all? I asked. Mom looked uncertain, glancing at her attorney before continuing. We hope we can rebuild our family relationships moving forward. How? The question seemed to catch her off guard. How? How do you propose we rebuild our relationship? What are you willing to do differently? Silence stretched across the conference table as they realized I wasn't going to make this easy for them. We could have regular family dinners, Sarah suggested tentatively. Like we used to. We never had regular family dinners, I pointed out. We had dinners when you needed something from me. That's not true, David protested, but his voice lacked conviction. When was the last time any of you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for money or help or advice about your problems, but just to talk? More silence. When was the last time any of you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? When was the last time you asked about my job or my friends or anything about my life that didn't involve what I could do for you? We're family, Dad said desperately. Blood is thicker than water. Actually, I said quietly, the full quote is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means chosen family is stronger than biological family. Relationships built on mutual care and respect matter more than shared DNA. I gathered my purse and stood up, feeling lighter than I had in months. I don't hate any of you, I said truthfully, but I don't trust you either, and I can't have relationships with people I don't trust. So that's it? Sarah asked, tears starting again. You're just going to walk away from us forever? I thought about Michael's last conversation with me, when he'd made me promise not to let my family take advantage of my grief. I thought about Jennifer's kids, who now had college funds and a secure future because I'd chosen to honor love over obligation. I thought about the peace I'd found in finally setting boundaries and keeping them. I'm walking away from the dysfunction, I said. If any of you ever want to build something healthier, something based on actual love instead of financial dependence, I'm open to that conversation. But it has to be real. No more manipulation. No more using guilt as currency. No more treating me like an ATM with emotions. I paused at the conference room door, looking back at these people who had shaped so much of my life. I learned something important over the past few months. You can't buy love, but you can stop funding the people who mistake your money for affection. 2 hours later, I was sitting in my car outside a medical office building, staring at test results that changed everything. Dr. Margaret Williams had been gentle but direct. Congratulations, Days. You're about 12 weeks pregnant. 12 weeks. Which meant I'd gotten pregnant in late August, just a few weeks before Michael became too weak for intimacy. We'd had one last perfect weekend together, when his treatment seemed to be working, and we'd allowed ourselves to hope. I'd suspected something was different, but had attributed the changes to stress and grief. I sat in that parking lot and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not the angry tears I'd shed over my family's betrayal, or the bitter tears of grief and frustration. These were tears of overwhelming gratitude for a gift I'd never expected to receive. Michael was gone, but part of him was growing inside me. Part of him would live on in this child who would never meet their father, but would know they were deeply wanted and fiercely loved. I called Jennifer first. I have news, I said when she answered. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was filled with understanding and joy and the kind of support I'd learned to recognize as genuine. Oh, honey, she whispered. Michael would be so happy. I know, I said, touching my still small bump. I think he knew somehow. Those last few good days we had together, he kept talking about legacy and making sure I wouldn't be alone. Maybe this was part of his plan. When are you due? Early May. A spring baby. Michael always loved spring. New beginnings. That evening, I sat in our home, my home now, and felt something I hadn't experienced since Michael's diagnosis. Hope for the future mixed with the strength I'd discovered within myself. This child would grow up knowing they were wanted. They would grow up in a family that chose each other rather than one bound by obligation and resentment. They would grow up understanding the difference between love and transaction, between support and enabling. They would grow up knowing their father through stories and photos and the business he'd built. But they would grow up surrounded by people who chose to love them rather than people who expected to profit from them. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the most difficult circumstances. Sometimes the family that matters most is the one you choose rather than the one you're born into. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't truly see your value. And sometimes, just when you think your story is ending, life gives you a new chapter you never saw coming. Thank you for following Days' journey from betrayal to empowerment.